But Florida definitely has hit many new lows as of late. The good news is that we may be able to actually raise the bar a little bit.
We're gonna
raise the bar. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna bring somebody into the studio who has been working her tail off to raise the bar here in the state of Florida.
For like 5 years now.
For 5 years.
Putting in the work,
doing what is necessary.
Yeah.
And so many things to talk about in this particular congressional district. I mean, you think Congressional District 23, which Jen ran in, is gerrymandered?
District 20 is so ridiculous looking.
You should see District 20. See?
It's
what
terrible.
I mean.
It's terrible.
And so we are more than pleased to welcome into the studio Sheila
Cherfilus-McCormick.
I actually said it right. How do you like them apples?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for getting it right.
I know how to say your name. No, I've got it.
Jen gets it. Yes, Jen always gets it right. But Peter, this is the first.
I think that's the first time that I've ever actually attempted to say your name.
Sheila Cherfilus-McCormick.
Well, the last name, because I always say Sheila McCormick, but
no,
respect,
but
if it's
she's
a hyphenated name, you're supposed to say the full name.
Exactly. But I do want to first tell you, first of all, love the rebranding. I love that you sort of took some, sort of regrouped. And I think that you focusing on using your first name with as much as I can easily say Cherfilus McCormick, not everybody can. Sheila for Congress is better.
Well, I did that, and I don't really think it's very good, but I used the combination of the two colors that you're using.
So anyway, guys, everybody, this is Sheila. Sheila, introduce yourself. Say a little bit about how long you've been doing this for forever, and go ahead.
Well, I'm Sheila Cherfilus-McCormick, and I am a resident long time of District 20. I grew up here, actually, since the age of 13. I've been lobbying in D.C. trying to fight health disparities for the last 10 years. That's how I got into this. My daughter had a learning disability. I was struggling to get resources. I was putting myself through law school. I was a single mother for 12 years. And the more I started trying to advocate, the more I saw the just unwillingness to actually hear and help. And that's when I started pushing forward. And finally, I got to a point where I said, I'm just going to run. And that was in 2018 that I said I was going to run. It was after I came back from DC and I went to speak to my congressman in his office, and no one cared about Medicaid, Medicare, really helping kids with learning disabilities. It was kind of they brushed it off their shoulders. Talking to me, ignoring me. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to come back and run. So I came back and I drove to Tallahassee and I filed. And 2 weeks later, I heard from the group that I was out there lobbying with, the Healthcare Association. And they said, he said he's going to look at your bill, the congressman. And I said, what? Is that what it took? And I said, well, I'm going to continue to run because we need it, right? This is just the cusp. So we have been running a campaign for this seat for the last 4.5 years, which we needed that time because the district is 22,000 square miles. And we've been hitting the floor walking. It really is a people's movement. And the first time when we were running, they said it's impossible. They told us that no one has ever gotten more than 12% against the incumbent. We got 32%. The last election. So I know.
And here's the thing, if you get every single one of those voters, you win.
Yes. And
I'm sure of all people, I'm sure you've done the math.
Yes. What's funny about it is, Jen, you were out there with us. You know how hard we were fighting. We were literally at the polls every day fighting for every single vote, knocking on the doors. We fought every single day. So there's some people who say, well, those are anti-votes, anti-congressmen. And I said, no, those are Sheila votes. They knew my name. We knocked on those doors. So right now, our strategy is to hold and keep expanding. With all these people in the race, everybody's claiming all of a sudden to be progressive, right? Everybody all of a sudden, right? Everybody now is Medicare for all. But where were you when our kids were suffering? You were silent. Where were you when our parents and family members were dying? You were silent. If anything, you tried to hold us hostage by saying, don't run because it's disrespectful. What was disrespectful is that we hired you to do a job. We pay fundings. Our taxes go for you to protect us. So it's disrespectful for you to put your needs over our needs. And so we're here, and it's so exciting because everybody feels like this is our time. We laid the foundation.
I want to say something. I want to say something to people, because to think that you got anti-Alcee votes is I don't think that's right. And I think Alcee is not hated like my congressperson is hated. Like I 100%, a huge amount of support was anti-Debbie. There's no doubt about it. That is a thing. I never got the feeling like that regarding you with Alcee. Yeah, there's definitely people that are very knowledgeable that know he should have stepped down a while ago. But for the most part, he was not hated.
Right.
And so I don't agree. I think that all of your votes were your votes. I do think that that is not a district where there were enough people that just wanted to get rid of him. I don't think that at all.
We were meeting immediate needs that were being neglected. When COVID hit, we needed basic things like masks, and we've handed out over 100,000 masks. Basic things like food. We handed out over 50,000 hot plates of food. So we just kept on meeting the needs. Even when it came to loans, a PPP loan, a lot of small businesses had no town halls on anybody telling them legislative briefs on how to attain it, how to prepare yourself. So we literally stepped in that gap because the motto is you don't lead when it's open, you lead when it's now, right? You prove yourself who you are, what you're committed to when the opportunity arises or when the need arises. And the need arose and everyone stayed silent. So we fought for that. And when we were at the polls, we heard them. There was a guy who said, "Oh, I remember you fed my family. I'm voting for you." And so those are our voters.
Yeah. I mean, we always on our campaign we're a service-based campaign. That was always the premise of what we're doing. And I always find it so amazing that nobody stops to think, why doesn't our representative have people out serving the community like we're doing as candidates? Like, why are they not doing that when by definition they're public servants and yet they're not out serving the community? And yet you and I both know that it's not hard to do. It's not hard to do. As soon as I realized we have some volunteers, we could do these things. Like as soon as I realized that, and imagine the resources that Congress people have and don't use them to, how easy it would be for any of these people to have like a volunteer army that gets service hours or whatever, and they're out doing the things that we're doing. And why don't we have that?
There's no want to. I mean, at the end of the day, that's exactly it. That's what got us into the race to begin with. I remember when it started, I don't know if people know that we're actually district mates. Like you're right there next to me, right on the cusp. And we had a conversation of what can we do? How can we bring masks? That's something that our people who are elected to Congress should have been doing. How can we get more resources? But there's no want to. The desire is to make more money. The desire is to suppress other candidates that might run. That's where the focus is. And that's why our districts are where we are right now. The people are suffering. But there's a growing amount of people who are ready to step up. And we see that in the numbers every single day. So our election is actually November 2nd, and we're very excited. And this is our time for change. This election is going to determine the rest of South Florida and what it looks like come August 22, where we have the primaries again. So it's like a continual running. We run again November 2nd. Then after that, after you win that,
right, you still have another. Right. Oh, wow.
No, you bring up a very good point. I do think that this could potentially be two races in the course of just over a year. We're speaking, of course, with Sheila Cherfilus-McCormick.
Good.
Yeah, I'm going to get a pat on the back every time I get it right. She's running for the United States Congress to represent the Alcee Hastings District 20. That could change a little bit depending on whenever redistricting ultimately comes to pass, but I'm sure
it's not going to happen between now and this does not
appear to, and that affects obviously a lot of other people potentially running. But with that said, what would you say? Because this is going to be a very crowded field. We already believe have 7 or 8 confirmed candidates in the race. So what is it that you feel distinguishes yourself from the rest of the candidates running?
Balls, right? Tell him, Sheila.
Jen, I was about to say that, but I was going to be politically correct and say courage. No, I just had the balls to do it. The rest of them don't. And
it's a big deal to me. That's a big deal to me. And I say it every time I talk about you.
Well, we have to ask ourselves the question, what do you really have to lose? And that's how I always felt like, what are you going to do to me? What's the worst that can happen? The best case scenario, guess what? Our children and our families get what they deserve. Worst case scenario, I'm here fighting you again. And that's how it's been. I've just been here fighting. So I think it's the courage. And right now, especially in Congress, we can't afford to send anybody who hasn't displayed courage before. If you think it's hard for you to stand up for the community in the state, they have no idea what's coming for them when they get to Congress. It takes a lot of courage to do it. And I think that's the number one. The second thing is I actually have a plan. There's a lot of people who are advocating and say, oh, I deserve to get there because it's a next step of service. There's no next step of service. It's not the same thing. Or what are you going there for? What is your plan and what's your purpose? We're really excited about our new initiative, which is the People's Prosperity Plan, which we found the money to give everybody $1,000 who's 18 and over, who makes less than $75,000 a year, $1,000 check consistently as an economic recovery check. And we found it by taxing automation and also people who are selling private information. So it's there. I have the will to do it. I have a plan. And I have an economic revitalization plan for our district where we're partnering and people can actually go forward, small businesses. So I have a plan. I've done it. I have experience lobbying both sides, trying to get our point through and getting people to sign on. Those are the major differentiators. I come from a business and healthcare standpoint. And I say that because it is extremely important to understand what that means. In business and healthcare, we don't get paid or applauded for promises. We get paid and applauded for doing. If you do the wrong job, you suffer dire consequences for yourself and for the people you serve. So I've never been in the business of promises. I'm not here for that. It just needs to get done.
Yeah.
And so in order to get it done, you need to have a plan, and we have that.
Yeah, I told everybody coming on, I'm like, okay, somebody early on when we came on said they had voted for you the past 2 times. And what was the question? They just want to make sure that how she feels about UBI or whatever it was. I don't know. It was a question. So we just said, I said, not only does Sheila support UBI, she's got a plan. She's got a plan. It's an binder.
It's funny. It's like a combination of Andrew Yang and Elizabeth Warren.
So yeah, she's got a plan. She's got a plan. And I said, and I Sheila's very, very policy wonky, and your background in business and health is a really good precursor to going to law school. Like for me, it was marketing and PR and then law. But for you being health and management, it's like this whole different perspective on the system.
Yeah, because when I came out of law school, I initially wanted to be a prosecutor or in defense. And every time I read a criminal law case, it reminded me of Bobby Whitney. Don't ask me why. It just was, to me, there's always something hilarious happening. Not the ones that are deadly, but the little ones. And when I came out, I just fell in love with the Affordable Health Care Act and the way they were able to meet needs and start including performance and the creative sides of it. So as for policy, healthcare, and seeing the transformation, that's when I fell in love with it. And then I got to actually propose comments when they had new legislation to different departments. Then you get to actually be a part of it. And since then, I've been doing that the whole time. So it's been a great process. And I think one of the best things about going to Congress is the power of the pen, but also implementation. There's a lot of good bills that get passed, but people don't know how to implement it stateside. And that's where we don't feel change in our everyday lives because we have no mechanisms of enforcement. And so we're going to change that.
Yeah.
We're speaking with Sheila Cherfilus-McCormick, running for Florida's 20th Congressional District.
And let's just also say, in case anybody jumps on, it's a special election. So this is actually coming up November 2nd is a primary. This is to fill an empty seat right now. So, this isn't next year. So I just want everyone to know.
No, we actually do have an election. And sometimes it is to your advantage to kind of have an open field. A lot of times people end up running at the same time.
The fact that your race will be the only one that's actually
a lot of attention.
Yeah, that is actually, I think, not a bad thing.
One of the things that I think really needs central focus going forward, because, obviously there was a big deal made about the census in the state. Who knows how we did if it was, we got another congressional district, and obviously that takes some degree of hard work, but we all know that gerrymandering is a very serious problem. Your district is emblematic of that tenfold. So can you talk about some of the difficult parts of running a race that basically has you, a resident of Miramar, having to, basically canvass and try to get votes all the way up to West Palm Beach? It's quite a lot of territory to cover.
Right. It's a lot, but thank God we have the stamina to cover it all. And what we're seeing really is that you have some areas that are really agricultural, and then you have some areas that are cities, and you have a few areas that are more residential, and trying to figure out what is the common need throughout. How do we meet the needs of everybody? And we're blessed because we can benefit from the cross use of everyone here. It's a shame that we don't have our neighbors, because where my district is, where I live in Miramar, right in between me and the other side of my district is District 20, and it makes no sense. So I literally have to go through District 23. I literally have to drive through Debbie Washman Schultz district to get to my other side of my district. And what is the number one factor that unites us? Color. That's it. We're the largest minority areas. So if anyone tries to say, oh, it's for another reason, it's not true. So that middle area that you're seeing, a lot of it is Everglades. So there's no
really that's the thing. It's swamp. It's alligators.
Yes,
and,
but what a lot of people
airboats.
But what a lot of people may not know, which I think is very important, and this is one of the big issues that exists within your congressional district, is that Belle Glade is one of the most impoverished Black areas in the entire state, and it's all the way in the middle of nowhere, and no one gives a damn about the people who live there, and probably haven't in a very long time. I can only imagine that this is an area that you are absolutely focused on, because Lord knows the establishment candidates are not going to pay any attention, but they really need help between Belle Glade and Loxahatchee. You know, to me, I think
which for the people that don't know are to the left of the green.
Yeah, so I'm going to highlight it really close. Like, this is basically it right here, all the way out in this region.
But what's so crazy for people to understand how the massive size of that green space is, and this might not be the exact current, because this, I don't know which Congress this is, but it's give or take, this is essentially what it looks like. But for anybody who sees, if you look at the bottom of the green and there's that teeny little strip coming off to the right, what is above that little white space, that's my whole district, basically. In that little white space that Sheila's district completely goes around and encompasses basically every vulnerable Black community that it could get its hands on to squeeze into this blue district.
And let's be honest, you know, this is there's been somewhat of a real political awakening in this country that hasn't happened probably since the 1960s. Maybe, if you want to even be generous, you know, the 1980s. But it's really been a very long time since people really started paying attention to these little nuances of the political game, which is, we're going to draw these districts in a way that basically protects us from any competition.
Yeah.
We're going to make it so that we have 27 congressional districts in the state of Florida, and maybe 4 of them are truly competitive in the sense that they can be flipped from red to blue.
Right. That we don't have that. All of our seats are, for the most part, safe seats. This is why. So just, you know, people, but it's interesting because from a distance, when you look at it, it doesn't look like it's that ridiculous. But then you get up close and you see this, like these tentacles, and it's like, it's just crazy.
I don't think there's anybody who would look at this and say, yeah, that makes sense. It doesn't make sense. And that's the whole point. It's not supposed to. It's supposed to be as difficult as possible as you can possibly make it. But you do have a distinct advantage over the rest of the candidates.
Yep.
You have run in this district twice now. You pretty much know it well. And I would assume that you know the areas that need to be focused on, especially, as I mentioned, Belle Glade, areas that have probably been neglected for a very long time.
Right. You know, Belle Glade is at the heart of our development plan, because Belle Glade has something that most of the parts of the district don't have. They have land. They have a lot of agriculture. A lot of our areas are food deserts. We have a lot of processed foods. When we look at the correlation between health and the ability to acquire healthy foods, it's definitely an issue. We have.
What happened?
I think the audio kicked.
Something happened. Something.
Go out.
There you go. You're back.
You're back.
Okay.
Now you're back.
Sorry about that. So when we have in the other areas, we have a lot of paraprofessionals who know how to give healthcare, but they don't have that in Belle Glade. I was actually there a few weeks ago, and we were talking to the people about what their needs are. And if more of us can see the opportunities in partnering together, then we can grow Belle Glade. The people of Belle Glade are wonderful. Like I said, there's a lot of things we could do there, and we have to partner together to make it happen. I want to get back to the map. A lot of people, when they look at that map, they feel like that middle area is a central real area. That's the Everglades. So no one lives in there. No one's there. So those tentacles are realistically where people actually live.
Right. That's the thing. Those 3 things are the populace.
Right. And so the middle section, if you're wondering why it goes there, it actually encompasses some places that are actually post-segregation. And people don't know that. That's where a lot of the Black population had to live during segregation. So it picks up those historical places. And what we see is a concentration of wealth that is outside of those areas, which is a huge issue. And that's why it comes out in peaks to capture those old areas. So if we're talking about economic justice, which this election definitely is, we have to take care of this the map. We have to ask ourselves, why are we subjecting ourselves and allowing ourselves to be in these positions?
So you're saying that like the Belgrade area, I mean, I just sort of had this like thought. So really promoting, sustainability there to share that with the people in other parts of your district would be really amazing. I mean, that would be really, I mean, why not take advantage of that they're all in the same district? I mean, that's the whole point.
Well, we could do it.
What is that? They're just nobody cares about the people in Belgrade,
Right. We can actually do that throughout the whole state or the lower half. So what I was proposing is that we just have grants there so we can have food trucks of natural food. Even if the food trucks were going to schools, going to senior homes, going to senior areas, that's where we have to be. We have to look at how do we promote healthy living with what we have while we're increasing jobs and stimulating our district. And so that's where my focus is. My focus is not on the regular co-signing topics that people have, because anybody can co-sign. What can I do to change that can make us grow better? Power of the pen. I can write them, I can enforce them, and be creative in creating a new district where we are, or a new country where we're actually experiencing economic justice.
Yeah, I like the way that, obviously you and I think a lot alike on things, which is why we get along. And I'm a big supporter of yours. But, the idea that this district is carved any other way than to maintain this sort of like white patriarchy would be completely ignorant, because the areas that you're talking about, those rural areas, that to me is where we've always probably discriminated against Black farmers, the people that have ever had property and had land and then were kept out of our sort of agricultural business for whatever reason. And we're still doing that, by the way. We're still doing that to them.
Right. And we have to talk about our immigrant population, right? My parents are Haitian. My dad came from the Dominican Republic and Haiti. And so at Belgrade, we have a large population of Haitians and Jamaicans and Hispanics. Miramar, we have the same thing. And this is where we have to actually look at us from a cumulus. It's not just African Americans, but they're putting all minorities into that lump and pushing us aside, which limits the resources. So I'm excited to be the voice of action so we can turn that around.
I do think that, and again, we're speaking with Sheila Cherfilus-McCormick, Florida's 20th district for the late Alcee Hastings, special election November 2nd. Definitely want to check that out. Sheila, before I do continue, what is the website so I can get it up already so people can start checking you out?
It's SheilaForCongress.com.
Okay.
Easy enough. Sheila.
FOR, right?
Yes. FOR.
Congress.com. Yeah, obviously, this is a 100% grassroots funded campaign. So we certainly would recommend that if you are looking to potentially help out on a race, this is definitely one to check out for sure. You just mentioned something very important. The Haitian population, that especially the Haitian population that speaks Creole, it doesn't get talked about enough. I thought you did a marvelous job the other day addressing the fact that there are people who, while they may speak English, would probably feel very comfortable knowing that their representative does speak their language. I don't know if there are other candidates in the race who do, but I think the fact that you immediately distinguish yourself as somebody who can communicate with people in the communities that feel like they are not represented. If you could talk about that, the importance of doing that, because obviously we know that a lot of Latino representation is very helpful if you can speak that language. So I'm curious if that is something that you've experienced as well, being able to directly communicate with people in communities that English may not be their first language.
Definitely. We see the difference because there's a saying in Creole where it's speak Creole, understand Creole, kind of like we're one people because we can understand the language. That's something that we don't have a lot of, especially when it comes to getting licensing. If you are a Haitian doctor, you come here, you have to take the exam in Creole, in English. But if you're a Hispanic doctor, you can take it in Spanish. So we see when it comes to licensing, there is a part of it that's discriminatory because now how do you have to learn the language? You can't even practice in your profession. So it's important that we have someone who can articulate those needs to get over that hurdle. But there's a lot of things in our language that is different than in English when you start to explain democracy, and that has to be done. But one of the biggest things I feel the Haitian community is missing is actually representation in Congress. At this moment, we have no Haitian representatives in Congress, and Haitians are one of the largest groups in the United States. and we have none. We've never had a Democratic representative in Congress. We only had one Republican. And the impact of that is that right now in Haiti, we have a lot of issues. We have issues with TPS extensions. We have issues with even the government in Haiti, and no one's speaking on it. We see with people like Marco Rubio, who's in the Senate. When you have someone there, they become the voice of that area. So if there's any issues that are going on in Latin America, they turn to him. Right now, there's no one to turn to. So we have a huge population that's not being represented. No one's speaking up for the population, but everyone's saying, I want your vote. Everyone's saying that I'm friends with the Haitian community. Well, if that was the case, why is it that Haitian doctors and lawyers, when they come here, they must take it in English, and other countries have a different privilege? So at that point, we have to realize that it's important that we have a voice. Without a voice, we're just eating alive on the table. So that's what we're here to do, is to change that.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's no doubt that the Haitian community and Haitian immigrants have always been disproportionately and fairly and justly treated here. And I remember as a little kid, the immigration policy, which is still the thing. I mean, it was, right. If you were Cuban, we'd roll out the red carpet. But if you were Haitian, we would, stick you on a raft and send you back. And I always found that abhorrent. And so to hear that there's also this disparity in testing is not remotely surprising to me. I was pleased that and I certainly know that we have election documents do come in Creole. I know that our ballots and our voting does come in Creole, but I never thought about licensing, and that just sucks. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was my thought.
Oh, it was a good one.
That was my thought.
But I also do believe that, not just representing the Haitian community, but representing a substantial community of color and knowing the issues that exist when it comes to some of the basic necessities that I think a lot of people take for granted, especially when it comes to fair housing. I'm actually reading up on that as we speak, and knowing that there are a lot of tricks. I always say, I'm not really concerned about the crazy yahoos that wave the Confederate flag. I'm concerned about the people who sign on the dotted line and make the decisions. I think that systemic racism is something that people can't necessarily see, but they know is there. And I'm curious as to what your experience has been like with that, and how you see your representation of this district helping change that narrative that's been going on for a long time.
Well, I think it's willful blindness, right? They know what's going on. They see it going on. A lot of people prefer to turn a blind eye just because it's easier. And that's when you need a voice that's always pushing to say, no, let's look at the root problem. What is blocking us from being successful? What is blocking us from accessing jobs? What is blocking us from accessing housing or good credit? We have to dig deep and understand what's really blocking us. And it is the foundation of the United States, to be honest with you. When we look at what happened during segregation, they intentionally kept this out. Those rules are still there. And if you ask questions like, why is this still on the books? No one can give you a good answer. That's how it's always been. That should be a red flag. If that's how it's always been, where did that derive from? Because we have a country that was full of racism and slavery. So if we have it there just because it's been there, we have to turn back the time and look at it and say, why are we doing this? And it's only when we're not afraid to confront the past and be honest about where we've been, then we can start cultivating a new system going forward. The culture of colored people in this country has always been one that I think is shared. It's a shared experience between immigrants of color and Americans here. And the reason I say that is because when I enter a room, no one says, oh, she's Haitian American. When I enter a room, they say that is a Black woman. And I hear that every single day. So the things that I'm facing, the things that I'm overcoming, it's in the same light. And I think that us coming together unified, not just people of color, not just people who are affected by it, but everyone, and how we're talking about it on this show, actually shows a unified force going forward, where our generation is saying no more. And I think that was a great thing about the movement that happened after George Floyd died. It was ageless, colorless, sexist. It was just everybody came together and said, enough is enough. And we started seeing change. So when it comes to institutionalized racism, we have to take the same approach. Everyone has a duty to speak up. Everyone has a duty to educate. And everyone has a duty to correct.
Yeah. So in the vein of education, I recently read a book called The Whiteness of Wealth. And I don't know if you've heard of this book or not. It's fairly recent and it was really fascinating. And it was really about all the different financial ways that our system is set up to benefit white people and white families. And it's things I never thought of before. And I'm not completely oblivious and unaware of race issues, but like it never occurred to me that they were in the tax code. It never occurred to me, and so I highly recommend everyone check out this book. It's called The Whiteness of Wealth. I did reach out to her and ask her to come on, and she's like, I really don't have time. So whatever. But it's a great book. And it talks about housing, education, employment, taxing, all the investing and all these different things and how they've been closed off to communities of color and how that has made us be where we are now in terms of no generational wealth in those communities. And so it's very deep. And I don't think people understand that. And I never even thought of it in terms of the tax code. And yet, sure enough, there is this very white supremacist basis of a bunch of our tax rules.
Well, let's look at how they rolled out relief for COVID. When they said everybody has to work from home, if first responders had to go to work, where were the provisions inside of our state or all over the country to protect the class that had to go to work and their kids had to stay home? Where was the equal access for Wi-Fi capabilities? These are things that they started addressing afterwards. But that put people of color at a disadvantage, right? Because you have to work those jobs, you have to leave your kids at home, and there's no Wi-Fi.
Right.
And even when they rolled out for small businesses, there's been a history when banks have control over funds and they have no real parameters and they have their own discretion, they give to who they call preferential clients. And the preferential clients don't look like me, Jen, they're not like you either, that we're not preferred.
Right.
And so when it came to rolling out the PPP, we didn't get it first. We weren't preferred. We had a long process. It wasn't until the second time when they said, oh, it's corrected. I don't believe that was a real oversight, to be quite honest with you, because we just came from the whole housing crisis and we saw how the banks handled that bailout, right? So why is it oversight now until after all the rich big companies got their money? And now let's correct? We can't be blind to these situations.
Right. And I think it's people expect to see something that's blatant. So like, for example, you'd expect to see, oh, Black people pay more taxes because they're Black. No, that's not how it works. How it works is, and this was fascinating to me. So let's say two households and the white household has $100,000 income by one earner and the wife stays home. Now, let's say the other household is $100,000, but it's 50-50 and it's a Black household, which you have more likely odds that the women are going to work and be equal in terms of salary. That's just how it works. So that household is paying more on their $100,000 in taxes than the household with the single provider is paying on his $100,000 in taxes. And those kinds of rules that are set up to benefit more of white family, societal, structural things and don't take into consideration other things, the end result is going to be disproportionately affecting Black people. Like that, it's not blatant, but but I see it so clearly now, and it's just, I would urge people to try to see those things.
Speaking of very important topic.
The pay gap. Yeah, it's massive, and it's not based on specifically saying skin color. But it's set up in a way that it penalizes people, especially people who are already paying for another thing. Black families are more likely to be helping to pay for older generations. And so because those generations weren't given their opportunity as well. So it's just not an equal scenario any way you look at it. So when you make policies based on certain lifestyles that only apply to one privileged group of people, it's going to inherently penalize the other people.
And I do think that two of the signature issues that would have the greatest impact on your communities in particular right now would obviously be Medicare for All and UBI. If you can talk about those two in particular that you do support and how that could not only close the gap, but in a way would also be a form of reparations.
Well, I think we have to take a look at it and really understand what UBI really does, right? It's a consistent payment that's going to each individual, and it's based on how much money we have from taxes. Tax dollars, understand, everyone pays tax dollars. we have to understand where that money is going to. Right now, our tax dollars are being reinvested into industries, not the people. So if we take a step back, especially in the middle of a financial crisis, and start investing into people on a regular basis, what we're finding is that people will actually be paying their survival bills, things like your electricity, your gas. There was a study that was done where they gave people $500 a month for 10 months. And with that, you know what they spent it on? They spent it on gas, groceries, electricity, and like clothing.
Yeah.
What are we saying for ourselves as a country? If we're the richest country in the world, why are people just taking 500 trying to survive? Those are the basic skills, the basic things we need to live. And this is where we have to start being for the people and not against the people. What I'm proposing is $1,000 at least for us to get out of this economic disaster that we're in. And after we do, then we can reassess and see how much more we can give. Reparations has to be something that's totally given to African Americans who are descendants of slavery. And the reason why it isn't really the same of UBI is because UBI gives it to everybody. But there is a special place for people who have been consistently taken advantage, consistently positioned against each other and not giving the same amount of treatment. Even how we showed you the map, how it was cut out. Those are areas that were post-segregation. Still to this day, no development, nothing going in there. We have to recompense, pay people back for the damage that we've done. We've done that for everybody who the United States has damaged. They have given them reparations, from the Japanese, from even demanding it for other races. So why not give it to the people who built this country, which are African Americans? I don't believe in reparations for every person of color. It has to be for the African American community. And when we talk about Medicare for all, without Medicare for all, I want everybody to be clear that there will never be healthcare justice without Medicare for all. Every equation they give you, I'm in healthcare. I've been doing this for more than 15 years. You will always be unequal, because there'll always be a system set in place so somebody can buy something better and you're left behind. What Medicare for All does, it's a great equalizer when it comes to healthcare. And healthcare is a basic need. So until we address Medicare for All, we'll always be in a situation where you have high mortality rates for Black women who are giving birth to children. You always have issues with lower income families. We're going to be in this perpetual cycle of poverty without having the two at the same time. It has to be a cumulative plan.
Yeah, I completely support reparations. I've seen a few different plans that I think that look really good. I'm open to that. I think it just needs to be decided by Black people. But one of the things in that book I read that was talking about one of the ways in which to really do that is through the tax code, and is one of the ways that you can give direct money. You do it in the form of a tax credit or whatever. Like, I'm so not economically savvy. You, I'm sure, would understand this infinitely better than me. But that was something that made sense to me as well. I'm like, oh, that's a smart way to go about doing it. I mean, it's just a matter of reducing burdens on people that have more of their fair share of a burden. It's enough already.
I think it's even more than that. I think we have to really start looking about wealth transference against the aggressors. There are companies right now that were built off the back of slavery. And they're functioning, they're thriving, they're getting tax breaks, they're not paying tax. I mean, we have to actually address the people who were participating in it. And until we're ready to do that, we're just talking about kind of smoothing it over. We can't go halfway when we talk about reparations. We have to go all the way. Either we're going to do it or we're not. And if we're not going to do it, this will always be an issue.
I know. It's really no justice, no peace. It's no justice, no peace. I truly believe that we will not ever truly be able to progress like as a people until we address this issue. I just don't. I don't think we're going to be able to prosper. Right. I don't think we're going to be. I think you have got to clean up your mess, or at least remedy as best as you can current before anything else is going to happen. So I just feel like we're going to be living in what I call like the bad karma until people recognize that we have to compensate for this. It has to happen. And without that, there's no justice.
Another thing I want to mention, I don't think the younger generations, how close we were to slavery. Our grandparents witnessed, lived in it. So what that means is, that adult or grandparent who lived and had slaves, their kids saw that. the way they thought, they passed on that thinking to their children. So our children, are starting a newer slate. But, for our generation, we were hearing that. I mean, when we grew up, interracial dating wasn't something that people did because we were too close. The proximity generational wise was too close. So you were raised by
people that suffered collective trauma. And
yes.
And here's the thing, like to some extent, I do understand that. My grandparents were post-Holocaust and their mentality was very fear-based, very suppressed, very fear-based, very gotta look out for ourselves, gotta, protect, and I was raised by people that were raised in fear of the Holocaust and that could happen at any time. And that kind of sort of fear-based thinking, it tarnishes each following generation in terms of their perspective. And so what Sheila's saying is so true. You're only maybe 2 generations removed from somebody who remembers somebody standing on a plantation. This is not that long ago, and it's collective trauma.
It's interesting because when Martin Luther King gave his speeches about having a dream, or even the last book he wrote about economic justice, back then people were like, yes, we wanted it, but I don't think anybody realized how difficult it would be with that generation living. It's impossible with that generation who was used to acquiring wealth off the backs of people. This is why we have problem raising the minimum wage, because they have an expectation that I barely pay you to work for me. This is what they've seen all their lives. And this is why I feel like the biggest hope is the hope for tomorrow, because our children can never say that, you saw taking advantage of people as being normal. That is not the norm. And every day we get up and fight for the minimum wage, every day we get up and fight for UBI, is when we're enforcing to the generations to come equality and not taking advantage of people. You shouldn't expect people to work for minimums just because you said so, just because you want to be rich. That is no longer the standard. So I'm excited because I truly believe that this is our generational work. It's to make sure finally we have healthcare equality and we have economic justice. And we could do that now because those older people who were stopping us, they're gone.
They're moving on. Look, that's the whole premise. So this is a good segue into the question, right?
Go ahead.
So we usually say, when we're talking to guests, like, what does generational change look like to you? And you basically just sort of answered that, but what do you see coming up from the next generation in terms of their attitudes? And, so what does generational change look like to you?
I think for our generation, what we're going to have to do is accept our younger generation. They're a free generation. They are everything we talked about, we raised about, everything we said we were going to be. They actually have the balls to do it. And so we have to embrace that. And we have to understand that we work together. So although I may not understand, I have a 17 and 18-year-old. They're both turning 17, 18 in July. And a lot of the stuff that they're doing, I'm like, you guys are crazy. This makes no sense to me. But, that's who I raised you to be. That's what I fought hard the nights where I didn't sleep, where I worked night and day, was for you to find an identity. I didn't want you to feel like you had to go work night and day to be something you're not. So my generational change is for me to lay down the foundation for economic, the foundation for health equality, and for me to see our children carry it. So my grandkids will be like, what? That happened? There was a time when we didn't have insurance. There was a time when they expected you to work and not be able to pay your bills. That's what generational change is for me.
That's awesome. Yeah. From the perspective of they shouldn't even know that was an issue, right? Like that's the goal, is for like your kids' kids to not even know that there was a time when people didn't have health insurance. Like that's just not a thing, where we didn't have healthcare.
Sheila, we do have a question from Blue Bandit, who I believe is local. And he says, Sheila, how are you going to connect with other members in your district? Like, how are you going to explain to them why you are the best choice? We did
talk about that a little bit earlier, though. Sheila is the only person that stood up for that seat just because it was the right thing to do.
We're talking about it right now. And obviously we're still, we're coming out of the COVID situation, but obviously there's a new variant. So, obviously there's still a degree of social distancing and safety that needs to be taken, but obviously curious as to, how you would see that going right now.
Well, during COVID, we learned how to campaign and knock on doors and be safe. So I had a mic. Jen, I don't know if you remember the mic that I had and the speaker.
Yes.
So I could talk to people from distances.
That was very smart.
So I always was able to communicate who I was.
For people who do not understand the organization that is Sheila, the level of organization and on top of itness is off the charts. And I even said, I go, for all I know, it's just a facade, but damn, it looks good. Because Sheila's the person that if there is a thing that will make something better and easier, she's got it like on her. She's got, oh, I've got that. Oh yeah, we got one of those. Like just always on it. And you are also surrounded by really great supportive people as well.
Yeah. So that's our first. We figure out how to do it on the floor. We figure out how to connect. The best way to connect is in person. On top of that, I've committed a certain amount of funds, personal funds myself, to make sure that we're getting out our information within a certain amount of time. And we're committed to raising a certain amount. There's no lie that this election is going to be an expensive election, but we've been working hard for a very long time for this moment. And we have a lot of supporters and we've even raised a lot. So getting the message out is not going to be our biggest hurdle. Our biggest hurdle is going to be touching the people we touched before in this short amount of time in the 22,000 square feet. But that's going to be a hurdle for everybody. And we have actually a home court advantage because we've done it for the last 5 years.
I think that's true. You've been spending the past 5 years building up name recognition. And yeah, there are some people that are in this race that are other sitting officials that have a certain amount of name recognition, but not around the exact specific district that you do. So their district is a part of that district. So they have name recognition somewhere, but not all the way around. And you have been doing this a long time. And I am hopeful that that is going to be an advantage for you. That it really is, being that you've done this before and you're, at this point, you're like old school.
Right? Could you believe that?
Yeah.
I remember when we started. I remember when I first met you. Yeah, I remember. I remember my aides and my interns. They're like, "We met Jen Perlman. You have to meet her. She's awesome." And it feels like it was like yesterday, but no, Jen, we're old.
We're old. You know what? We met those. Was that when we met the girl? Where did we meet them? When that was when Stacey Abrams was down. And Stacey Abrams was down here talking. We met some of those girls. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, that's what it was.
That was in that was at Miami-Dade.
It was like at Miami-Dade or something like that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's where it was.
Yeah, FIU.
Yeah. No. Miami-Dade College.
Yeah. So no, it's been a long time and it went fast. But it's an ass kicking and it is. And it's, to some extent, it's kind of nice that that you're going to at least have some resolution in November, that you don't have to wait until August for some resolution, but then you got to start all over and do it again. Basically, it's like you're barely going to even have a break between campaigns.
No, but I definitely think that just having the opportunity to get your foot in the door. And like I said, because of the proximity between this special election and then ultimately when the next primary would be, whether you win or lose, I think there is going to be a secondary election. Like if you win, I still think one of the challengers in this race will probably try to come after you in the next primary election.
I think so.
So I think that this is more or less a year. No, this is more like a 15-month race in a way. I think that's what it is. Well, look, you gotta.
I think a lot of people forget that we were on a campaign less than 8 months ago. We were running. So I don't think we really had any real time off, because once I ended my campaign in August, then I was doing work with the Biden-Harris campaign for I Simple Biden. And then after that, that's when the whispering came, get ready, the time might be here. And then we're getting ready, the time's here. So it's been straight campaigning, and it seems like it's going to be like that for another 2 years. And that it's an advantage because my team has always been there. They come back and forth. We had the launch. And for the launch, we had over 100 people register. It rained, but we still came close to that 100 mark. And those are real people.
I thought it was great, by the way, Sheila. It was great.
Yeah, I think you definitely have the advantage of, potentially being able to outwork your opponents. I mean, doesn't matter, not going to name them, but one of the opponents in the race has already spent a boatload of money on a major billboard, putting up signs in a lot of areas. In
she
Sunrise.
She knows.
Okay, so
You talking about Sleepy? You talking about Sleepy?
Is that what his nickname is?
Is that what you call Perry?
Oh, wow. That's interesting. Well, I'm not going to say anything.
You know why we call him Sleepy?
No, but I knew that's who you were talking about. No.
I'm sure there's a good
Why?
reason for it.
Tell me why.
Because there's a picture
because he was sleeping on the floor. He was sleeping during session, right?
Yeah, I think at the federal level, Ted Cruz got caught doing that recently. Yeah, it's not a good look. But then again,
it's a bad look.
I can still remember like 5-6 years ago when John McCain was still in the Senate, and he was like, they were like voting on going to war, and he's playing like Words with Friends or something like that. Yeah, we're going to bomb some people, and I just got that word. And, it's representation really is about serving the people and the people's needs.
And let's talk a little bit about how your previous congressman was basically absentee for at least a full session and was being basically can you tell people what was going on with that because how long has he been there but not really there?
I want to say for more than a year. Well, he's been there. Beforehand, he hadn't passed the bill in a long time. But when he became very ill, it was Debbie Wasserman Schultz who was doing the voting. She was doing voting for him.
Yeah.
Yep.
But it goes back to the mentality of who do you choose, right? I tell you, I got a lot of backlash because why are you running against him? He's an icon. Yeah. And I had to say, I choose myself and my family and the people who pay taxes to put us there. I can't be scared forever. And I think as politicians, as people in the community, we have to take a look at who you're electing. If you were sleeping through a session where they were talking about Stoneman Douglas and the shooting of innocent children, what do you really want to do when you go to Congress? You could take a nap here. Maybe that's your time. But I think we have to evaluate who's ready for this fight because it's a fight. And no matter what, we know that there's a fight on voters' rights and voter suppression. We know that there's a fight when it comes to social justice. We know there's a fight when it comes to economics. Right now, our district does not have representation. They started doing the earmarks and we were left out. So every other person in Congress did earmarks to make sure they had funding coming into their district. We have no one. And the district has to know that. That's the results of voting for someone who we all knew might not make it. Now
that's the result of someone sitting on a throne, knowing that they're sick, knowing that they should be passing the torch, and refusing to do so until never. And so this is selfishness to the nth degree. I find it completely disgusting. This was completely an avoidable situation. And yet, if not for people's constant ego and just power and holding on to power, this would not be the case.
Right. And so now we have the governor who called the race for November 2nd, which makes no sense because that's the longest amount of time they've ever called for one. And now the actual, the primary is November 2nd. The election is January 11th. Early voting starts on New Year's Eve. So we can't.
Well, that's why. That's why.
Yeah, no, the only thing I would say in defense of that is that this is more or less a plus 60 Democratic district. So this is, if you win November 2nd, you're winning January 11th. So it's not, true. I'm not going to get too caught up in that type of thing. But I do think that the whole trying to draw this thing out as long as possible because they want to, again, the GOP as it's currently constructed in terms of its leadership, the old guard, if you will. And we know how bad the Democratic leadership is, but the old guard GOP leadership led by Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy, their goal is to gridlock. And with the Democrats being down a seat right now, it closes the gap even more and it gives them an opportunity to do more of this, gridlocking, if you will. And there is some important pieces of legislation that is pending right now. Obviously I think it's the American Workers Plan, if I'm saying it right. But obviously the PRO Act is number one. The PRO Act is, and if you want to just touch on that before we go, I do think the PRO Act is probably the most important piece of legislation because it's very much a pro-worker bill. It doesn't have a lot of the add-ins that some of these other bills have, which especially like the voting rights bill, I think has a lot of problems. Just me personally, I've already reviewed a number of things in it that I take issue with. But the PRO Act it has one of the most significant pieces of legislation we can have right now for the state of Florida, which is basically superseding right to work. To me, that is one of the biggest hurdles that we have economically in this state. And I would assume if you were in Congress right now, you would be a yes vote on the PRO Act.
Definitely. One of the things that we wanted to actually even include is because the PRO Act, I love the PRO Act, but the biggest issue I see with it is enforcement. Who is going to enforce the PRO Act? Well, people know that they actually have the right now to join unions or be in a union. That's what I foresee as an issue. So what I was calling for is for an office to be open within the Department of Labor, and it would be the Office of Labor Relations. So if you're having any kind of issues, exercising your right to be in a union or any issue with your job, you can actually just refer it and file a complaint with that office. And that's implementation. Now, that's how we actually get real results that we can feel every day that you're working. You know who to call. So there's things like that that we need to tweak. Without us having someone in Congress to tweak it, we're left in the dust. You mentioned the infrastructure bill. That's a huge bill. And there's things that need to be in there also to make sure that everyone has access to it. And there's also building the district and getting them ready to acquire those contracts. We saw that there was a huge amount of wealth that was just produced from the Rescue Act. And who did that funding go into? Our company was lucky enough to get that contract also. We were the largest minority owned and the largest woman-led organization to get it. And we were able to hire more than 1,200 people, paying them no less than $20 an hour. That's a huge accomplishment. So if we don't have people preparing people to get their companies ready, we're not going to have federal dollars coming into the state. We're not going to have that federal salary coming into the state. And so we need someone there immediately. So if you actually why he pushed it out is so we can be left out of those developments. Like it leaves us out.
That's all. I mean, I knew he would drag his feet. I knew there's no surprise. I knew that would happen. I knew they would drag the feet as long as possible. Just like they are with redistricting. I know that too.
It's terrible because I feel like there's no accountability for leadership. When you're a leader and you have to lead people, you lead the people who voted for you and the people who don't vote for you. It's a fiduciary responsibility. And the fact that it's like, oh, it's okay because we're not part of the same party or the Democrats are down here, I think it's foolishness and no one should ever stand for it. So what that means is if I change my mind, let's say you're Republican and you change your mind, then he can retaliate. Is that what we're doing? We're encouraging retaliation? Absolutely not. This is like all ridiculous to me. And I think our standards have slipped too far. And I think we need a strong person in Congress to call it out for what it is. I'm so tired of letter writing, writing all these letters and signing them. No.
You bring up a great point. And I think that is one of the problems that I think a lot of people have with like members of the squad and all the progressive younger members that are coming into Congress now, because unfortunately the leadership within the Democratic Party, whether you're talking about Nancy Pelosi, Maxine Waters, Dick Durbin, Steny Hoyer, you're talking about people with all due respect, I'm not an ageist here, but these are all people in their 80s and they have been in politics for over 30, in some cases 40 years. So to me, I think that again, why we call it generational change is at some point you have to say, we need new ideas, we need new leadership, and we also don't need leadership that is literally attached at the hip to corporate special interests, because let's be honest, that is the biggest impediment to progress we have in this country. Corporate special interest completely dominates the political arena today, and it completely dominates on both sides. The only difference is that the Republicans are completely transparent about being bought, and the Democrats pretend like they're not. So to me, that is really where the change does ultimately end up happening. Now, even though Alcee was good on a number of issues, he was still corporate bought. There's no getting around that. And I think having the opportunity to have a representative in the district who is not taking money from payday lenders, who is not taking money from Big Sugar, who is not taking money from NextEra Energy, who is going to only be grassroots funded, that is what is going to create the real change in the district. If you elect a representative who is simply going to take the same corporate money that the late Representative Hastings was taking, then you're not changing anything.
No, it's the same thing.
So if you are going to elect a representative and you want to see that change here in South Florida,
Sheila for Congress.
Sheila is definitely a great option. And I think you guys would definitely be best to check out SheilaForCongress.com. Sheila, before we go, any final thoughts? The floor is yours.
Well, I just want to encourage everyone to take a good look about who is driving change in Congress. Let's remember when coronavirus first hit us, it was progressives who were fighting for a people bailout and not a corporate bailout. The only reason we started getting those stimulus checks, the only reason they started even lifting up the unemployment and putting more money out is because we fought for that. We lobbied, we advocated, we fought for a people's bailout. If we keep electing or have by chance elect someone who is just there to say yes and co-sign, you will not see these initiatives. You will not see any kind of UBI. You will not see any kind of Medicare for all. I mean, at the end of the day, the objective for many people is to keep it status quo, and status quo is not prioritizing people. So if we're serious about the change that we want to see, we need to keep electing progressives on a massive scale. A lot of the fear tactics, they say, oh, they're socialists. No, it wasn't socialism when you received that stimulus check, was it? It wasn't socialism when you received the unemployment, was it? It wasn't. And so we have to realize that these are lies to scare us from getting our rightful due, our things that we need. And what we need is healthcare and economic justice. So I thank you guys so much for being
Thank you for coming on, Sheila.
Jen, I love seeing you.
Back at you.
Peter, you're awesome also.
I really appreciate it. But you two are soul sisters.
Yeah, no, we'll keep in touch. We'll keep in touch, and I'll you can come on again before, we'll have you on again before this comes up, and we'll keep our eyes on your race for sure.
This will drop immediately after we conclude. So this will be streamed. It has been streamed on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, and on Twitch. So this is obviously going to be a great opportunity, to share this everywhere, and hopefully some other independent media will take notice of it. And
I always forward people to you anytime I can.
Yeah, your message needs to be heard. It's very important because, the one thing I will say, and we obviously had, Omari Hardy on the show, the one thing that I don't like, and Jen pointed this out recently, and especially because you have already run twice for this seat, the Sun Sentinel does not want to even acknowledge you're alive. And as far as I'm concerned, that is a very big no-no, and that is the type of stuff that has got to stop.
They're a rag.
Yep.
They're a rag.
They
will not talk to them. I will not entertain them. I will have nothing to do with them. People, if the Sun Sentinel are endorsing somebody, you should probably really take a deep look into that person, and not in a good way.
And not only that, but if we're being completely honest here, the complete blatant disrespect that the Democratic Party does, especially to Black women, is disgusting. You are used as props, and that type of garbage has to stop. The fact you couldn't even acknowledge that Sheila's running in this race,
didn't even put your name. I'm sure you saw that, right? Like
yes.
It had like the Three Stooges and whoever else, and not you.
Now, with all due respect, there are other women running in this race, and they were acknowledged. But why were they acknowledged? Because they are taking corporate special
They're
interest
establishment
money.
candidates.
That is it. That's where it begins. That's where it ends. If you want legitimate change, I highly recommend you check out Sheila Cherfilus-McCormick
Sheila Cherfilus
at SheilaForCongress.com. Sheila,
thank you, Sheila.
Thank you so much for coming on, and you better believe we'll have you back on soon enough.
Bye.
Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.